This is Dark Ages Radio. I am one of your hosts, Mike, and tonight I'm joined by, of course, Chris.
Hello.
And the indestructible Chigg.
Evening, everyone.
Hey.
That didn't sound very indestructible, but you're a humble man, aren't you?
I am what I am.
Gotcha. You're only indestructible when you get angry or something, right?
Yes, exactly. It's rage-based indestructibility.
Oh, sweet, dude, sweet. Yeah, so what's been going on with everyone?
My gaming it's been a month, isn't it, since we last recorded? I think so.
Yep.
Painting scenery. So I've been making dirt cheap rivers and swamps and stuff for War Machine Hordes. Finished running Witchfire Trilogy Part 1. That ended really well. And what else gaming-wise? Finished reading Iron Kingdoms in Thunder Forged and started reading Guild Halls of the Deathless for Mummy the Curse and the Strix Chronicle Anthology. I've read the first 2 short stories in there, one of them by Chuck Wendig, and it's awesome. It really is a good story. I mean, all of it really gets you into the setting, and you can tell when they're referring to different groups of vampires or like how they're viewing how the Strix work, and it really gives some ideas on how you can inject the paranoia into Requiem. So yeah, cool stuff.
Definitely good. Chuck Wendig, that's not a guy we've heard from in quite some time. I guess he's too busy being a real novelist and that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he's got a couple of series out.
Yeah, I do need to get hold of his stuff though. What's the first one? It's
Mockingbird?
Yeah. Blackbirds,
Blackbird.
I think it is. Yeah. I tried to look for it in the store, they didn't have it, so I was just like, whatever.
And we're very close to getting stuff all sorted out for doing this World of Darkness God Machine Chronicles Rules one shot with yourself, Mike, James, and Sam. So
that's right. Yeah, we're gonna make it a segment in the Forgotten Lore.
And obviously everything's together for the next one. It just needs editing and putting together. So I'm working on that, and so Sam. So we'll get there. Anything else, guys, gaming-wise? What have you been up to?
Shadowrun, that kind of stuff. I did read a small RPG supplement, Racial Insecurities: The Fetch for Cthulhu Tech, and that's it's a very small player option supplement, basically, where they kind of give you the option to play these little dudes called the Fetch, which are kind of like familiars and sorceress assistants, but they're also somewhat mischievous. I don't think they fit into many Cthulhu type games as a player option, and unfortunately the supplement was kind of expensive. It only has 6 pages of real content, and it costs $3 for the PDF, so I wasn't too impressed by that, but it was kind of interesting, I guess. I might actually end up running Cthulhu Tech in the future, so we'll see what happens with that. But I'm thinking about using a lot more mecha and possibly converting it to Fate.
It's a good plan. We convinced our GM to convert the Earth Dawn campaign that we were playing in from 4th edition to Fate, and we've had 1 session so far. People busy and having to go out of town and family stuff, so we only had time for 1 Fate Dawn session, but it was pretty fun.
Did you have 3 times more story?
We kind of did, yeah. There was combat, but it was taken care of in about 10 minutes as opposed to 2 hours as it was in 4th edition. So I recommend it.
Yeah, Fate is a pretty good system, but Chigg, you and I have had this discussion before that while it is really awesome for story gaming, the World of Darkness system isn't that bad, and it doesn't make too much sense to try to convert World of Darkness to Fate, especially given the new God Machine rules for New World of Darkness.
Sure, they've already plundered Fate for all of its useful bits.
Yes.
Pretty much. Very good. All right, so tonight we're going to be discussing a little bit of Changeling the Dreaming. Then we're going to be doing a secret frequency on the Ogen, And then finally, we're going to be talking about Vampire the Requiem and the Dark Ages. So, with that, let's move on over to the news segment. Okay, so news. Well, one unfortunate thing that came out about 2 weeks ago is that, unfortunately, VTES, Vampire the Eternal Struggle, is not going to be coming back through drive-through cards. There was some excitement that perhaps a print-on-demand option may be available for that card game, but all the different parties were not able to come to an agreement, and it's back where it was. So Viken, the basically VTES player organization, is going to keep producing their own fan sets and make them available through PDF, so you can get new cards that way. And they've actually just started releasing some promos of the new cards, and they look phenomenal. They look just as good as the professionally done White Wolf cards. So that's very good to hear. And the other good VTES news is actually that the Gentleman Gamer has started up his own kind of VTES club online, and people primarily use Lackey CCG. I'm in both the club itself and their new VTES League, so that's just going to be pretty interesting to play, and especially because you have to start off with a starter deck, which are all universally pretty awful, and kind of build up your deck from there. So should be pretty cool.
That sounds pretty wicked. Yeah, it's a shame it can't get released through drive-through cards, but hopefully they can figure out something in future. Cool. What else have we got for news? We've had a few releases. Guildhall of the Deathless for Mummy the Curse. What else has been released recently?
Mummy the Curse came out. Like the physical book actually arrived, at least for me.
Well, for you, yeah. I'm still waiting. I'm hoping it might turn up this week. What other books are out?
I think that's pretty much it for actual books. Additionally, there's some MMO news flying around. At the LA by Night LARP convention, Mr. Eddie Webb, Mr. White Wolf himself, did a quick discussion and Q&A about the MMO and dropped a couple things. And there's been some, I don't want to say miscommunication, but misinterpretation of what he said. Some people have been claiming that, with the new business manager that came on board, they actually trashed the entire MMO and are starting from scratch. And that does not seem to be the case. Eddie indicates that essentially what's going on is they have a company retreat coming up for the Atlanta folks, and they're going to be talking about what they can do with the game, especially how they might break up the sandbox, theme park, and cafe features into separate but interconnected games, similar to how Eve has Eve, the Dust first-person shooter, and the new Valkyrie kind of space simulator. So that could be interesting, but really no definites right now. But there's actually some really cool news that also came out of this, and that's the fact that at launch, they now expect that there is going to be a Mac OS X version of the WoD MMO. And being a Mac user myself and a Mac gamer, I'm pretty excited. And I've actually previously raged a whole lot on the Midnight Radio podcast, vidcast, because there was no Mac version. So I'm pretty happy with this current change.
Cool. Yeah, that all sounds pretty great. Yeah, I know very little about the Valkyrie thing. I'm not too sure how that would work for the WoD MMO doing equivalent. But yeah, sandbox, theme park, and cafe.
Right. Well, so basically, the sandbox is the
typical.
Well, it's gonna be. Well, I think it's more the political activities of the different players battling to control the city or specific resources. Theme park strikes me as in World of Warcraft, for example, it's the quests. But in the World of Darkness MMO, it could be easily a single player game.
You don't think that'll be something like Elysium, the theme park?
No, I
just go to hang out.
No, that's the cafe. That's the cafe. Theme park is more PvE, kind of interacting with the world itself, which would be quests similar to those and missions you'd find in, say, Vampire: The Masquerade Bloodlines, that video game.
Or Secret World. It'll be a lot.
Yes.
Secret World is because that's still going. I mean, I uninstalled it on my computer just to make some space, but that's still going really strong. and is constantly having things out for it. So it's a good model to what MMO could be like in some elements.
Yeah, it's going to be pretty interesting to talk about. And Chris, we might have a guest that could come on and talk about this a little bit, right?
Yes, we have reached out. There are a few people we can get to talk about this, about MMO stuff, because of course, James, who's been on numerous times, he's worked on MMOs, and he's actually in the computer game industry, so he's in a position to talk about this type of stuff. And Michelle Flam, is that right? Last name? She can correct me.
Yeah.
She's worked on various MMO type stuff and has been on the Wadcast previously, so it'd be cool to have her and James on here, because we just have to sit back and listen to those two talk business, and it fills up an hour.
Yep, pretty much. Cool. And what do we have in the mailbag, actually? I, for example, was recently challenged to run a World of Darkness game combining elements of Shadowrun, Demon the Descent, and Mirror's Bleeding Edge, which is the kind of cyberpunk rules and setting for the World of Darkness. And I gotta say, challenge accepted. I have to defend the honor of the podcast, and after my failure to run Changeling the Dreaming...
Yeah, I think there was only one challenge that was not accepted.
Well, I accepted it and then rescinded my acceptance.
Yeah. Whatever you got to tell yourself, Mike.
Maybe one day. Yes, so it's not only for the honor of the podcast, but it's also to redeem myself. So you can expect probably a Google event coming out sometime in November to run that game.
Mm-hmm. Cool. No, that'd be wicked.
Yeah. Additionally, Eileen sent us some cool information on a lake in Tanzania in Africa. What happens with this lake is, for some reason, it seems to be because of calcification due to the very basic nature, as opposed to acidity of the lake. Lots of small animals are actually turned or calcified into stone, or something similar to a hard material. And yeah, they just kind of sit there and float around. It's pretty creepy, and there's a very strange picture of a calcified bat on the website. So we'll link that in the show notes. Pretty cool stuff. And I think it actually gives us some good ideas for maybe a river of death in the underworld for the New World of Darkness.
Oh, yeah. It would be really good for that. Yeah. I mean, this actual story's been doing the rounds everywhere on the internet, so it's but it's pretty cool, because obviously I think Eileen suggested it'd be really cool also in relation to Promethean and the idea of these creatures possibly being animated because they are the source of some form of Pandoran, or what's the other thing? Maybe they could be used by mummies, to make what the hell's the name? Ankh-Hata something? Whatever the hell the term is, the chimerans they make. Anyway, cool. Also, Geeks Out After Dark, which is a RPG podcast, gave us a shout out because this month they are looking at horror RPGs in general. So, people should go listen to them because they'll be going through all of the horror RPGs. They've recently done a show that looks at kind of like the history of horror RPGs, going all the way from, the original Call of Cthulhu all the way up to, current World of Darkness and everything else. Most of the updates you'll either find on their own website or on Tumblr as well. So yes, thank you for the shout out. Is that all for news?
Yeah, I think it is. Unless I completely missed something.
I think it was just a slow news week.
Slow news month. Where is my Demon the Descent? Where's my Mage 20th Anniversary Edition?
Yes.
It's alright. I'm not going to get angry. I'll stay cool.
The werewolf books that we're due in May are almost done. That's like news.
You're still bitter about this.
A little, perhaps.
Alright, that's fair enough. And I think with that, let's move on over to the classic World of Darkness.
Classic World of Darkness.
Hey, Chigg.
Yeah, Mike.
Hey, So remember that time I was supposed to run Changeling the Dreaming because you challenged me to?
I vaguely recall something like that happening. Yeah.
Yeah, and then I just couldn't do it, man.
Yeah,
I just couldn't perform.
Wrap your head around it, maybe, or
I don't
didn't
know.
understand. I don't know. It just didn't.
I wasn't getting any good
click.
ideas. I wasn't getting any good
I understand.
ideas.
It's a complex game. I understand.
It is a very complex game. So maybe with your gnosis, your secret knowledge, you can explain this mythical world of the dreaming to us.
Well, I can do my best. It is my favorite of the old World of Darkness games.
Indeed, sir. Indeed. So where do you think we should start? Where's a good place to start as we unfold the myth of Changeling?
Well, let's begin with what is Changeling? It's the fifth and final World of Darkness game until Hunter the Reckoning came out about 5 years afterwards. It's a story of a group of spirits forever exiled from their paradisiacal homeland, struggling to fit into a world that is toxic, hateful, and destructive to their very nature. It's a story game about balancing limitless, chaotic creativity and unbridled imagination with solid responsibility, practicality, and the stifling nature of the mundane world. It is, at its heart, a game about games.
Whoa.
I would say from that description, to me, it's almost the other side of the mirror to what Changeling the Lost is about, because obviously that's about escaping the chaotic world where you have all this creativity and returning to a mundane life, whereas obviously Changing the Dreaming is about, you're kind of is the other side of that. So that's a good place to start, and for comparative purposes for people that are maybe more aware of the one than the other. Okay, cool. So you are basically playing these. You're playing people who are embodied by these fae spirits.
Kind of. A changeling, like all of the other old World of Darkness splats, is a human with something else stapled on or built into their soul. In the old World of Darkness, a regular human has an unawakened avatar. A mage has an awakened avatar. A vampire, when they're embraced, has their avatar is destroyed and it's replaced with a beast. Werewolf is a person who doesn't have a regular avatar. Instead, they have a piece of the greater werewolf spirits. A changeling soul is wraiths have their are just a soul whose avatar has gone on back into the reincarnation pool and has been replaced with a specter. Now, a changeling soul is merged from before birth with an immortal spirit of creativity, which they call glamour, and, for lack of a better term, dreams. It's just basic creativity. It's the drive to move forward. In the ancient past, in the long, long ago, in the before times, before humanity's beliefs became so rigid and unbelieving of magic, these space spirits were able to exist in our world all by themselves, just out in the hidden glens and the freeholds. But as humanity became more and more rigid and banal in its beliefs, the world became a colder and deadlier place for the fae spirits. Finally, when they could no longer stand existing in our world, they created the Changeling Way ritual, merging their immortal essence with a mortal soul and entering the reincarnation cycle, attaching themselves to soul after soul down through the ages. That's how changelings were created. Not all of their kind wanted to go along with this. In fact, they're the leaders. A kith, which is a subsplat basically, of the fae known as the She, took their retainers and loyal followers back to their homeland known as the Dreaming in search of a better way to survive, or, depending on which side you listen to, running away from the hardship. When banality, the cold, hard disbelief, became strong enough in our world, which they refer to as the Autumn World, the Dreaming was cut off. The leaders of the Fae, the She, were not able to return. They abandoned their subjects, the commoners, alone and without direction on Earth. For 600 years, the common kiths struggled to survive here in the Autumn world. There are tons and tons of changeling kiths and splats and this and that and the other, but in the core book, including the previously mentioned She, there are 9. The Boggans, who are industrious craftsmen, spirits of hearth and home. They're kind of like hobbits. They're my personal favorite kith. The Ishu, or Aishu, depending on who's pronouncing it, are spirits of travel and adventure, exotic places, and foreign peoples. The Knockers, who are like dwarves and gremlins, are tinkers, who are dreams of industry and creation, though their creations are never quite good enough for them. The Puka, who are animal men, tricksters, liars, dreams of freedom, nature, and a more simpler, wilder existence. There are the Red Caps, who are dreams of hunger, desperation, the cold of winter, and monsters. There are Satyrs, who are dreams of love and revelry and passion. There are the Sluagh, who are the secret keepers, the dreams of scary things whispering to you in the darkness from under your bed. There are the Trolls, who are titans, giants, dreams of honor and combat, defense. And for 600 years, they were left alone here on Earth, reincarnating from body to body, making their way as best they could without leadership or really any form of overlying structure. But then, in 1969, when man landed on the moon, for a brief moment, all of humanity was united in one act of creativity and imagination, getting humans off of our planet and onto another celestial body. That huge surge of creativity and hope and imagination created what is known as the Resurgence, which is when the gates to the dreaming reopened all of a sudden, and the She returned. When they returned, they assumed that they'd be welcomed as returning heroes and put back on their thrones in charge of everything, just like they had when they left. Because, for Fae, they're immortal. What's 600 years to someone who lives forever? But the Changelings had lived lives. They'd lived 30 generations, growing old, dying, forgetting themselves, being born again. The vast majority did not welcome the return of the She. The commoners had moved on. They'd moved beyond the system of governance. They were no longer feudal individuals, feudal society. They didn't want a king and a queen, but the She had other ideas, and thus began the Accordance War, a long, bloody, horrific conflict between the She and their retainers, who went with them to the dreaming, and the commoners who stayed here on Earth. After vicious, horrible battles where blood was spilled on both sides, eventually an uneasy peace was reached. The She took their place as the dreaming decreed at the head of society again, but the Parliament of Dreams was created, thus giving commoners a seat at the table for the first time.
Wow. Okay, that's a lot to take in. Yeah.
It is indeed. Now, Chigg, the whole Accordance War kind of does sound strange. It seems like it's a bit off, especially how it was fought, with the kind of regression in tactics, going back to almost like feudal style of fighting. But it also kind of makes sense given the mechanics of the different domains and really what the She represents, which is the dreams of nobility and that sort of thing.
Yes, the She are the dreams of nobility and leadership. They are meant to lead. They truly have a divine right, which doesn't exist in the real world, but in the magical world of darkness, they really are supposed to be in charge. They have powers and abilities that let them set rules and set regulations, and they use these to enforce the rules of honorable combat on the commoners. The commoners would have been happy to strike them from the shadows and then run back away, but that's just not how you do it when you're fighting a medieval war.
Right. They could even have like a pitched battle on just like an open field or something, but no regular mortals will even see it. They'll be turned away and the like, which is all pretty funky, isn't it?
No, it's not funky. It's magic. That's how magic works.
Good point. But no, I'm just trying to kind of illustrate that there really needs to be kind of a different way of thinking with Changeling the Dreaming. There's a lot of additional rules that come out of the way that their magic works with the arts and the domains, and how you won't think of the same sort of monkey wrenching wars of the that you see in Werewolf, or the strange cosmic wars of Mage the Ascension.
No, they're much more, surprisingly, for the magical creatures that they are. They're much more down to earth in their fights. They get right out there in the streets and they just beat each other to death with sticks and swords.
Given the setting and given you have these conflicts, what would you say is the kind of the default type of game you can expect from Changeling?
It depends entirely on your players. You can have a political game, like you do in Vampire, between the courts and the courtiers. You can have a fight, a combative game, like Werewolf the Apocalypse. You can have deep, meaningful, metaphysical conversations about what is creativity and what is banality, just as if you're playing a Mage the Ascension game. You can be as dark and quixotic as Wraith the Oblivion. It all depends on what kind of game you want to play. What kind of games?
Obviously. But I always think that even if, because all the games ultimately, any role play game, you can play in any way you want, and you can have as much combat or as much politics or as much metaphysics or exploration, or it can be more mundane or more magical. You can stay in the real world, or you can like in Werewolf or Mage, you can go into the deep umbra. And what I'm getting at is what you think is the core gameplay experience that Changeling offers that perhaps the other ones don't. Because if you look at Mage the Ascension, it really is, the core thing is about the Ascension War. If you go back to the original versions of it, or even the later ones like revised, you've still got the burning embers of the Ascension War. So all those things about the politics and about the exploration and about the metaphysics is all hinged on those things, offering something to the cabal of mages to engage in the Ascension War against the technocracy and the Nefandi. And if you look at Vampire, all those things about where they come from and who they are in their clan and the politics and their antagonistic battles against the Anarchs and against the Sabbat is all hinges upon the fact that those are the final nights to make a difference before Gehenna comes, and you don't know when Gehenna is, and it's this kind of millennial fever. So, what do you think is the core kind of experience then of Changeling then in that sense? What is the main story that you really, with all the politics, with all the magical stuff, that it really would allow you to tell well compared to the others?
The core concern for Changeling is that winter is coming. Winter is a time when humanity no longer feels a creative spark. They just exist from day to day. They go on. They no longer dream. They no longer have hopes and goals and things that they strive toward. It's the death of creativity. It is the technocracy's big win, basically. When that happens, changelings will have died out. They will have lost their fight. They will no longer have anybody else left to inspire, no one from whom to draw glamour, and winter will have fallen across the land and killed all hope.
But then what does that mean then for a typical game then? Does that mean, what would you say then? How does that translate into a plot and the goals of what the hell's the term? Is it still a motley of changelings?
Yes, it's still a motley.
Yeah. Okay. So how does it translate into that?
You can try to save up as much glamour as you can get your hands on, which is what one of the factions is trying to do secretly. They're just shoving people who are glamour fountains and production assembly line people basically into the Dreaming, and so that when winter comes they can hide out. You can try to fight it. You can try to hold back the tide basically and bring magic back into the world, like in Mage.
So it reflects kind of Mage. So hold on, let's get this right then. So obviously you've got the changelings, and you've got their conflict against the She, and there's an element of a war of freedom versus divine right to control. So how is that affected by the idea that winter is coming? I mean, is the She's need to control the changelings driven by the fact they need to get all this glamour before the end time?
Well, there are two courts of changeling, the Seelie and the Unseelie, which is more like summer and winter. It's more law and chaos than good and evil. The Seelie are supposedly the quote-unquote good guys. They are there to save the day and bring hope and honor and all that fun jazz back into reality. The Unseelie are the ones who are just socking it away for a cold, rainy day. There's another conflict along those lines.
Okay, and then
there's a lot of moving parts.
Yeah, I mean that's one of the things. I mean this is why you're getting all these chronicle books as well. It's for the New World of Darkness is obviously is trying to see when you're unfamiliar with a game or you're new to it, or you never really quite got it, is for other people to try and like deliver what is that core experience. Because I think this is one of the things, obviously with Vampire, it's everyone kind of understands what a vampire game, well, I say everyone should, but a vampire game in my mind should kind of reflect. And to me, the source of inspiration for that, obviously the work of Anne Rice, obviously things like Being Human, the UK series anyway, for how vampire society works and why they do things, and kind of the antagonism between vampires. I think maybe one of the issues with Changeling is that maybe more or less not obvious, or maybe is it too black and white in the conflicts there, and it doesn't offer to people what they want. I mean, I don't know. I'm just trying to tease out what really the main stories are that you can tell. The thing it delivers really well, and then where you can get the variety of that on that idea and expand beyond that.
Okay, just as glamour and creativity and hope and inspiration are leaving humanity as a whole, and they're being replaced with mundanity and boring banality. A changeling, each individual, has to find a way to maintain that balance within themselves. They don't want to go too crazy creative, or they will lose touch with reality. They don't want to go too boring and mundane, or they will lose their changeling soul. It's a game about finding balance at its heart.
Okay. So, I'm just trying to draw some more parallels. That compares quite well with a lot of things, obviously, in Changeling Lost, and I think in some respects compares quite well to things in Werewolf the Forsaken as well, with the idea of balance especially, because harmony is like a main thing in that game. Okay, cool. Mike, any more comments then? Or additions to my thoughts there?
Yeah, well, I think to kind of tease out the sort of default setting, it might be good to look at the political structure because, for example, in Vampire, that's pretty critical because, typically your default Vampire game is in the Camarilla, dealing with the Prince of the Primogen and other politics of the city, and possibly with the antagonistic nature of the Sabbat. So, how's the political structure of Changeling work on maybe a city level or a regional level?
The Shi, since they came back, have set up a series of royal courts. There is a High King who rules all the changelings. There are lower kings and queens, dukes and duchesses, and barons and baronets, and so on and so forth. In the city level, you will have what are known as freeholds, which are natural fonts of creativity in the world. They're equivalent to a node in Mage or what are they called? A cairn in Werewolf. Just places where glamour flows freely into the world. And generally speaking, the Shi control most of those, if not all. If you want access, you have to play the game and be part of their court. They will set up knights and barons and this and that and the other to control their lands and control creativity and control access to glamour. The commoners will do their best to gain access to whatever free sources they have and try to play the game.
Indeed, I gotcha. And glamour itself can be harvested in a couple ways, right? Which are pretty critical for the change in the game itself. You can kind of almost mooch off of creative people, but you can also what's the term? Reap it from an individual.
Yeah, there are two main ways that one can get glamour. One is the Seelie way, where you go and you inspire others to creativity, and by that inspiration, you get a little bit off the side. Another way is the more unseelie way, where you just go out and find somebody who is thinking creative thoughts, and you basically rip the glamour from their body, and you leave them kind of broken and not super happy.
Mm. So really, that sort of that conflict right there between the more or less Seelie method and the unseelie method are pretty much an instant source of conflict in the game, and it can be pretty important for playing things out, at least for short-term issues and short-term conflicts. Cool. Yeah, I think that's kind of a good basic discussion of Changeling.
I have one last point I was going to ask.
Sure.
What would you say then is, I mean, because I think this often comes up with, say, when you look at, say, Mage in particular, because I think Mage is also in danger. A game of Mage can be in danger of going off in a direction where it loses a sense of a particular thing, and that is horror. Because where would you say then within Changeling the Dreaming is the horror? How does horror manifest from this setting and the concepts that you've explained and the conflicts that are inherent within the setting?
I'm glad you asked, because a lot of people ask that question, and my answer is that at the very core of Changeling, it's a game about people who struggle every minute of every day to try to exist in a world which does not understand them, which rejects them, which would destroy them, and that which makes them who they are just by their very existence. It's a game about being who you are and trying every second of every day not to forget who you are. Because as soon as you start forgetting, it's a very slippery slope.
That, again, is kind of, in some respects, the polar opposite of the game that Changeling the Lost is. Because Changeling Lost is about recovering your mundane life or there is the chance to do that. And the innate horror within the setting is the fact that there are things that want to steal you back, and there is the fact that your experiences in this other world, Arcadia, can come back to haunt you, and is this twisted kind of experience where certain things are true and certain things are not, and almost a level of losing your mind, because clarity is this big thing that changelings can slowly go mad, and they lose a grasp on what is the real world and what is the dream world and what is Arcadia. So in Changing the Dreaming, the horror then is the losing a sense of who you are, and then whatever, and that's that I can get a sense of, and that's quite interesting. But then is there also a horror element of things being completely chaotic, unfettered, unleashed, power of creativity, in the sense that all the goblins and ghouls and chimeras and the Jabberwocky are unleashed, and it's these fantastical horror elements. Because I think that's one of the interesting things in Lost I like, and I think in Dreaming again you can draw upon that, is where kind of the classic Brothers Grimm and old folklore is real, but in a very visceral sense. The gingerbread house is real, but it's got teeth and it's wanting to lure you in and eat you. And in a sense, I imagine in Changing the Dreaming, that could be a case of a changeling's creativity gone wrong and gone out of control.
You can go too far in either direction.
Yeah.
You can forget your mortal life just as easily as you can forget your immortal life. And either way is not a good way to go.
Okay. Mike, any other points on the horror side of things? Because I think the important thing is finding the horror in the game. Because I think it's too easy to get lost in all the other stuff. Like Mage is really easy to go off on. Like, you're just traveling the moons of some stupid planet, and you're on some boat that does it, and then there's off the port bow, there's Void Engineer's spaceship, and you're just like, what the hell is this game? Where's the horror?
Mm-hmm. Not so much on horror, but I think one of the important things to bring up about Changeling is that while the original core book and the base setting had this kind of Celtic mythology to it, with the Sidhe and the different types of fairies and the very Western feudal style, the rest of the game does introduce many other types of fairies from a lot of different cultures, doesn't it, Chigg?
Oh yeah. Like I said earlier, it begins with 9 and quickly spirals into the 50s and 60s, different kinds of fae.
So that's I think it's a very good introduction to Changing the Dreaming that we didn't really have in our previous rapid fire way back when in episode number 22. So I think that should be quite sufficient for now.
All right.
And with that, let's move on over to the secret frequency.
He took the stairs. I want money.
Ogen, known in English as the Eyes, has haunted the Sonian Forest in Belgium for nearly 80 years. This entity's origin lies in the death of children and an urban legend presented in the 1937 Dutch text, The Children of the Haunted Forest. In the early 20th century, local nuns began finding the burnt bodies of children throughout the forest. Although numerous bodies were found, little documentation from the investigation remains. There's even disputes over the number of bodies that were found, some saying 8 were found, and others claiming 80. Whatever the case, it is said that the children were murdered and set ablaze one at a time, before the murderer finally committed suicide in the Sonian Forest. At least one child escaped and told the tale, his account being contained in the Children of the Haunted Forest book. In the years after this terrible event, a sickly green fog was often sighted in the forest. While this normally wouldn't have seemed strange, it could just be swamp gas or something like that, the fact that the fog was followed by small black silhouettes gave campers and drivers a pause. Some early accounts even described the fog as orange or white, dancing slothfully through the forest, being followed by the laughter of children. For most witnesses or passers-by, Ogen isn't particularly dangerous. Car drivers have seen shadowy figures dart across the street. A few overnighters have reported bloody handprints left on their car, but no murders are reported. Only a few have been brave enough to face the green fog as it approaches, and each has noticed a sensation that something very large was staring at them from within the fog. Now, normally, Ogen would not stand out amongst the long list of paranormal ghost phenomenon, except that it hasn't been cited in nearly 30 years. Typically, these sorts of urban legends have the occasional sighting or recording, particularly something as massive as the eyes. But no passerby, no ghost hunter, no one's seen it. So we have to wonder, what's changed? Has the environment changed? Perhaps the people? Or whether the ghost itself has crept back into the forest, remaining in solitude? In the world of darkness, Ogen has a number of interesting storytelling possibilities and opportunities for imagery. So in Vampire, perhaps it's the gangrel primogen for your city. You can use this kind of imagery to represent him. Maybe he spends much of his time roaming the forest in mist form with a small retinue of ghouled animals following behind. Another interesting clue I found related to Ogen was actually on Google Translate of all things. So I was typing in Ogen and I hit auto-detect because I couldn't remember exactly what language it was in, whether it be French or otherwise. And Google translated it into Danish as opposed to the true Dutch. The Danish translation to English actually came up as the Anda, which intriguingly enough is a gangrel bloodline presented amongst the Mongol horde in Dark Ages Vampire. So what could a Central Asian bloodline, supposedly exterminated in the 14th century, have to do with a 20th century ghost? Ogen also provides some interesting ideas for Promethean the Created. Perhaps this is an isolated Frankenstein who is hunted throughout the forest by a pack of small, childlike Pandorans that he created. Only by climbing trees or hiding in the fog can he escape the Pandoran claws and teeth. And maybe 30 years ago, he finally met his end, but those Pandorans still remain, waiting for an unfortunate throng to pass through. And in Mummy the Curse, Ogen could perhaps be some kind of bizarre child cult. Maybe the children themselves were actually self-immolated as part of a ritual to become the lifeless. If the local nuns ever found the truth about this twisted faction, how could they fight against it, and how would their faith be challenged? So guys, what do you think? Any ideas?
I've got it. Okay, so the fog, which is taking people, is the manifestation of one of the true Fae. The bodies of the children being left behind are children. The children are actually fetchers after the family or hunters, perhaps, realized what they were, and they killed them in the forest, and using the dead children as a warning to both people and to the true Fae not to attempt to take more children from the nearby towns. So then, within the forest itself, there could be a verge which leads you into the hedge and into Arcadia. If we want to go a little bit more interesting, this could be. I'm just going to say that I'm going to go with something weirder. The book De Kinderen van het de Bezetsen Bos, is actually a abyssal intrusion, and so this book is awaiting a time for it to manifest itself again, and when it does so, a similar event and scenario will occur, but elsewhere in the world. And every time it's doing this, it's racking up a higher and higher kill count, because the children that it kills become abyssal beings, and it's almost slowly rewriting those areas of reality and these children into their abyssal forms. So it's kind of like a take on the Prince of a Thousand Leaves from Boston Unveiled for Mage the Awakening. Geist, again, this is a perfect example of something you could have occur in Geist. There could be an Avernian gate within the forest that is waiting to open, and when it does open, the children come out and they're looking for people to take in to balance the death energy of the Avernian gate.
Well, what if the mist itself is the Avernian gate? It's mobile.
Yeah, that would be fucked up.
Yeah,
that would be really good. Obviously, if we're going to keep on with something that's more recent, maybe this is an example of a infrastructure of the God Machine that was used and it worked, and maybe something remains of the cogs of this infrastructure ready to be used again. Maybe it's a location for demons to go to understand the manifestation of the God Machine's infrastructures, and so better understand how to defeat it. Or maybe this is all a bad experiment of a particular group of hunters. So what's the one that does a lot of experimentation? Hunter the Vigil? I can't remember, but you get the idea.
Yeah.
There you go.
Cool. Yo, Chigg, what is the big thing in the fog that's staring people down? What do you think? Hit me with it.
What is the big thing in the fog? I think it's a Gorgon.
Ooh, cool.
From Werewolf the Apocalypse. It is a spirit of the wild that is trying to keep people out of its forest. The children got too close. The Gorgon struck, and it absorbed them into itself.
But what are those small shapes following behind it? Are they spirits or something else?
Well, they're spirits, clearly. Spirits of the wild.
All right,
spirits of they're wildlings.
Okay. I like it.
I'm trying to think. Obviously, the cool thing with when you get forests like this, it could all be, you could tie all these together with like different forests that have done something weird. So there's like the Devil's Forest that we covered ages ago. That was in northern Italy somewhere. And there's the Suicide Forests in
Aokigahara Forest from Dark Ages Radio episode number 16, where we talked about Changeling the Dreaming.
Yeah.
Aha.
So,
it's almost like I planned this.
You could almost tie all these together. So obviously these are all actions by some, as Chigg suggested, some sort of forest spirit. It could be some giant wildling or an idigum type creature for Werewolf the Forsaken, and these are all just different examples and manifestations of that creature. Oh, and actually in Werewolf the Forsaken Predators, there is it's not an idigum, it's something else, but there is a giant invisible spirit. And I think there's another one that actually manifests as a fog. So there are possibly two big giant spirits that you could use that this fits with quite well. I think that's me tapped out.
Yeah, same here. Chigg, you got anything?
No, I'm good. I think
Awesome.
Chris covered this pretty well.
Right on. So with that, I think it's time to move over to the new World of Darkness.
World of Darkness 2.0.
All right, Chris. Dark Ages.
Requiem for a Dark Age, in fact. So obviously, a while back, we had a series of Darklings by Steve and Adrian covering Vampire, the Dark Ages, which is, of course, for the classic World of Darkness. And currently, there are writers working on a 20th anniversary version of, Vampire, the Dark Ages. It's funny, actually, we were doing this because I commented on Jeffrey McVeigh's Google Plus post last night about how he was going, surely, watching Kindred the Embrace counts as research for what I'm writing. I was like, well, which book's that? And he goes, Dark Ages 20th anniversary. And I was like, oh, right, well, doing that kind of something related to that this weekend. And he goes, link me to that when it's done. And I was like, well, what may be useful for you is, and I linked him to those Darklings, and so it saves him having to, it may help him with some of his writing. He can just listen to that and it condenses a few things. So based upon that, we're going to talk about how you could run Vampire the Requiem set in the Dark Ages. So this is also sort of a prelude to the Dark Eras book, which is also in the works for New World of Darkness. So let's go all the way back and talk about, first of all, Vampire the Dark Ages. Vampire the Dark Ages is set in and around the time of 1197, which falls in the middle of the period which is then detailed in Vampire the Requiem, Ancient Mysteries, Clash of Empires. That chapter in Vampire the Requiem, that details the era between 1095 to the 1300s. So the whole idea of this segment is that we can draw inspiration from existing World of Darkness books for the classic World of Darkness. So this is wonderful books that range from Constantinople by Night, Ashen Cults, Cainite Heresy, all those wonderful books for Vampire the Dark Ages, and use those as ways to run a game of Vampire the Requiem set in the Dark Ages, because while they will share innate similarities, because you've got vampires existing in a time of religious warfare and where technology isn't about, and so you're more able to happily show what you are and be a lord of the night. There are subtle differences between Vampire the Requiem and Vampire the Masquerade, which means that you can tell quite different stories. So the years between 1095 and 1300 is a period that really details the slow revival of a larger kindred society after the fall of the Camarilla and the fall of Rome. So the main factions within Europe that we have left at that time are the Lancia Sanctum and the Invictus. The Lancia Sanctum, of course, is important these times, as it is the main covenant that holds the knowledge from Rome, and is also the main culprit for the burning of many books. So, the Dark Ages are called the Dark Ages, more to do with the fact that knowledge was lost. And so these vampires are possibly, the culprits for that. It is also a time of a testing of faith. So the sanctified kindred travel with the Crusades to bring divine wrath upon the Saracens and Crusaders. This follows the tragic loss of the Black Abbey and the Monachus. So to explain that, the Black Abbey was the main abbey and holy church of the Lancia Sanctum. The Monachus was one of the first original children of Longinus, and so the keeper of the faith and the one that wrote all about Longinus's history, and those formed the basis of the creed of the sanctified. Also in this time, when the Black Abbey was lost, the Spear of Destiny itself was taken away. Now, around this time, the Lords of Europe are forming the group that would become the Invictus. So the Lords reach out to each other, hoping to reform something like the Camarilla, and harks back to that lost empire. So one of the key events during this time period is the Fourth Crusade. The importance of the Fourth Crusade is a very big moment within Vampire the Masquerade. And again, in Vampire the Requiem, this is a time of schism between the Church of Men, and also leads to a schism within the Church of the Kindred, because there's this classic breakdown between the classic western part of the remains of the Roman Empire and the eastern part, and the Fourth Crusade is emblematic of that. The Lancia Sanctum also were, as a group, they did not rule kindred, but they did take it upon themselves, much like the Pope, to anoint leaders. So these princes often gathered to be called the Invictus rather than Senex of the Camarilla. And of course, many of these lords claimed they had a right to rule based upon, various rulings and scripture from the past. Okay, what else can we say? During this time period of the Dark Ages, the Lancashire Sanctum, of course, are focused on scripture, and in particular Theban sorcery. They are, of course, rooting out heretics of their faith and heretics within the mortal church, because, of course, the Lancashire Sanctum see themselves as the anointed and holy monsters of God. They believe their position in God's great work is to make men and vampires, turn to the Lord and do His holy deeds. And so, of course, the Lancashire Sanctum is also rooting out the pagans and heathens of Europe and of the East, and so that brings them into direct conflict with many groups, which of course will be the seeds of which in future will form together the collective known as the Circle of the Crone. Of course, in France and Italy, there are many domains that have their own princes, or see themselves above the princes. And of course, in these areas, like in France, you have groups like the Cathars and the Bogomils, and also in the northern parts of Spain. And of course, all these human holy heresies will also lead to church-based heresies within the Lancashire Sanctum. So this time period also sees many schisms and formations of different creeds. The Invictus began as lords, and they embrace more, they form larger broods and armies of ghouls. You have the start of cyclic dynasties within this within the Dark Ages, as elders fell to torpor as their blood became too strong. And of course, the elders gathered in Rome so that an archbishop would bless a new emperor. This was the formation of a new Camarilla in their view. These emperors across Europe, of course, were first led by a seer known as Aelfgifu. My pronunciation, I'm sure this is awful. And this seer foresaw war across Europe. And so this gathering of emperors and this seer and the highest priests of the Lancashire Sanctum, they anointed a new lord, an emperor of the night, the Nacht Kaiser, who was not selected but elected, and he was the prince elector amongst all princes of the this empire of the night. And so began the Holy Night Empire, or as it was known as the Heiligen Nachtreich, or of the Invictus of the Der Besicht. So you can see how this night empire of the Invictus, of vampires, and its relationship with the Lancashire Sanctum mirrors that of the Holy Roman Empire and their relationship with the Holy See of Rome. And this was first proclaimed in 1142. So the proceedings of the meeting are written in the Book of Council, and of course there are different versions of this book. The Rome Codex says they united to conquer all. The Late Codex says they united to defend the kindred. The Realmere simply says the emperor was not elected. It does go into more detail of the electors and more detail on the visions of the seer. And this text, being written in the 12th century, is also an accurate account of the Third Crusade, because of course vampires were there, and by their immortal nature, they allow for a very good first-hand experience and writings of certain events. This codex is also very important because it contains not only information about the first elected emperor, but of the night Holy Night Empire, but also has many prophecies that are detailed, and these are prophecies leading all the way up to and beyond the 21st century. And so this book has gained a lot of interest for kindred through the centuries. The first Holy Night Empire covered Germany, Switzerland, and Italy, but then grew to cover France, Hungary, and Eastern Europe. The emperor was seen as a mediator between the prince electors and the lesser princes. And so this you can see as the beginnings of the first estate, the Invictus, while the Lancashire Sanctum became known as the second estate. The emperor had his imperial court. It had an inner intimate room known as the Oath Chamber. This is an opulent room where oaths were sworn between emperors and other lords. There were nightly bloody feasts, and each city had a notary who would be there to represent their city and their prince to the Nacht Kaiser. There were also competitions between these officials and between electors who wished to be princes and princes who wished to be electors. So, there's a lot of competition between all this. So that's important to note, is that some electors were not princes of their cities. Much of this internal conflict finally came to a head between the guilds. So, to explain, in the Invictus, there are numerous guilds, like the Guild of Speakers, the Guild of Historians, the Guilds of Artists, and so these guilds represent a particular skill. Speakers being quite important because normally this guild is populated by like the heralds of cities and by the harpies. And of course, prominent speakers were coming from Florence and Pisa, and they were vying for position and for each other's domains. Also, the sanctified of this time were suffering their own heresies. So I explained, the mortal church had its own heresies, and the sanctified had the Gorgondite heresy, suggesting that the kindred soul was not in fact damned, and that by properly resisting the beast and following the word of God, they could receive his blessing. The Deva are often caught up in the misunderstandings of Catharism. That was guidance not by fear, but by sin. And another heresy stated Christ himself would not save the kindred, and that Longinus was his sire. Also, it is clear that the Western sanctified and the Nut Kaiser turned their attention towards the east and the lands of the Saracen and the riches of Constantinople. Constantinople, of course, had its own church and its own creed and its own vampires and its own bloodlines. Its lords, known as the Adamantes Athanatoi, were also known as the Unconquered Immortals. Their lord, the Dominus Noctis Imperator, ruled over the Council of Priscae. The Byzantium sanctified advised these immortals. The bloodlines form the basis of the administrative groupings, the Thema. One example is the Mystigoi Gangrel, monks who were allowed to feed on the mortal monks of Constantinople. The Legio Damnata of Constantinople was a military order formed in the 6th century, and so mirrors their I can't remember what the group is called, but they existed for the Camarilla during Roman times.
Legio Mortis.
There we go. Thank you, Mike. And so there was a shifting of loyalty, and they used the Tagma Ton Xenon as mercenaries. Pagans, of course, as I said, were targeted by the Invictus and Lancashire, and Lithuania at this time, of course, was the largest pagan city-state. Many of the cults and bloodlines there would go on to form the Circle of the Crone, and they gathered for mutual aid against the church. The Vikings, of course, had their own vampires who were proto-acolytes, and in Constantinople, the Imperator allowed some of these nomads from the north and other barbaric lands to form the Tagma Ton Xenon, so that means foreign guard. So, you had these foreign Viking vampires being mercenaries for Constantinople. In Constantinople, you also had this group. These mercenaries, they fed upon the non-Greek population. The Midnight Crescent was a group of Saracen vampires from the east, and the Al-Amin was a covenant devoted to governance, but still married to the Islamic faith. Their sultans and caliphs ruled over Ummah, and the Banu Shaitan were a group much like the Sanctified, who sought to find meaning of kindred existence, but in Islam. So the Janai were elder vampires who followed the old Persian faith rather than Islam. There were also two packs of Belar's group in this area. There were the Breath Eaters, that were a group that went committing amaranth, and of course there were packs of Belar's brood. The latter saw the Longinus as a false prophet. Apparently, they were gone after the fall of the Nutcracker, but rumor is that the Breath Eaters now survive as 7. The Immortals saw themselves as the true heirs of the Camarilla, which goes back to the splitting between east and west parts of the Empire. And so the Immortals see themselves as heads of the Church and Empire of the East, and were embraced before the fall of Rome. To them, the Invictus are upstarts, and the Sanctified are wayward sheep. And so the Fourth Crusade saw the armies of the Nutcracker and, of course, the armies of the Mortals taken from Venice and directed there by the Doge Dandolo to attack the gates of Constantinople. So, of course, it's very clear that you could go to the Vampire the Masquerade Dark Ages material, in particular Bitter Crusade, and make use of that material, and with a bit of reskinning, and of course with these details in Ancient Mysteries, you can really retell this story with very different details for why this all occurred. So the fall of Constantinople sees the Byzantine kindred scattered, and with them they took to the west their form of governance. So obviously, Prisci soon became very common in the courts of Western princes. The Thema died off, but in their place arose the guilds. The guilds, of course, fought each other in Italy, and this all finally led to a route where the two meisters of the guilds of Pisa and Florence were killed off. And this eventually led that the only route for the emperor of the Nutcracker was to abdicate and the electors to renounce their titles. And this was all really to stop the war and to preserve the Invictus. The Sanctified, of course, and kind of incorporated the Byzantine Creed. And of course, you also have the Islamic Creed, and that remains in modern nights within the Lancashire Sanctum. And of course, some of the Byzantine Creed went off into Russia and into the Middle East, taking their creed with them, again rejecting their Western cousins. Of course, Constantinople was a focus of interest for many parties because it was believed the Spear of Destiny was there. And the blade of the spear was rumoured to be in the Church of St. Sophia, and the pole of the lance also made its way there. And this leads us back to something that Mike and I talked about when we talked about Avernian Gates and the Underworld. And so, again, from the book For New World Darkness and Book of the Dead, there is a legend that under Hagia Sophia, there is an Avernian Gate that the Doge Enrico Dandolo went into to take to find ancient relics such as the Holy Grail. And so it's possible that the Nutcracker and the Fourth Crusade was really a reason so that the vampires of the Lancashire Sanctum could recover the Spear of Destiny. The main bloodline of vampires behind this could have been the Ossites. So yeah, there's a lot within Vampire the Requiem to really play through the events of the Dark Ages and to really tell, whilst on the surface quite similar story to that which is within Vampire the Masquerade, but has quite a lot of subtle differences. Some of the other things that stand out within this setting, because of course, there's a few things we may have not mentioned. We've not said anything about the Ordo Dracal, and we've not really said much about the Circle of the Crone. And so there are many bloodlines within the Dark Ages which survive into modern nights, which obviously then exist within modern covenants. For example, the Mystigoi, this group of vampire gangrel monks, they're a heretical cult that survived the Knights of Constantinople and survive within the Ordo Dracal. They're a bloodline seeking transcendence, not just from their curse, but to be one with God. And so they see power then within the coils which were developed by Dracula. So they're essentially a Gnostic heresy with similar views as the Paulicians. They found their home with the Byzantine kindred and part of the Tagma Tonzenon, which was a military group. So they're primarily a group of mystics and scholars, and were rivals to the Agonosites bloodline, which would continue for centuries. There's the Order of St. Martin. Nosferatu unite the Order of Invictus. They support the laws, but are also reviled, leading them to act as a form of secret police. Formed around the 11th century, created by Martin of Jerusalem. They generally their curse makes them appear like lepers. Martin of Jerusalem studied the blighted and ill knights and monks, learning from them and even embracing a number of them. They're a group of repulsive wanderers, traders of boons, and acting as a dark version of the Knights Templar, and they officially joined the Invictus in 1317. The Agonistes, are a Mekhet scholar bloodline. Many of those who go on to be within the Ordo Dracal in the early Knights, they would have been part of the Sanctified of the Eastern Creed of Constantinople. Their goal is obviously documentation, unearthing of lost knowledge, and they seek to fight the fog of eternity, the thing that causes vampires to lose their perfect memory of events. This also means they have a place within the dynastic houses of the Invictus, helping elders as they come back out of torpor to remember things more properly. Early Knights saw the bloodline spread across the Mediterranean and Near East. Their original library was in Rome, but given the fall of the Camarilla, it was moved to Constantinople. So it's no surprise that artifacts like the Spear of Destiny was brought there. The power of the bloodline was broken with the sacking of Constantinople, and their library was destroyed along with the Master Archivist. This also led to the bloodline becoming distrusted in the East, and the lack of connections there became known as the silencing of the Middle East. So, of course, the destruction of the library redirected the agonist agenda to the archival, from archival to education, because they see no point in holding on to knowledge if it's just going to be lost. The Tsimanu are a Mekhet bloodline of priests that will go on to join the Ordo Dracal as well, and existed when Vlad, Dracula, was mortal. Apparently, they favored by the legendary vampire. They even administered to him in his mortal years. Based on the Eastern Orthodox Christianity, they existed in parallel to those in Constantinople. They made their home in Carpathia, and they served kindred just as priests would serve men. They would provide safe havens, counsel, and the word of God. They would work to save the souls of others. They have hidden monasteries in Carpathia and under Prague. The Western Lancare see them as backwards rather than heretical. And the Samano do not follow the creed based upon the teachings of Longinus. There are the Vedma, gangrel Slavic witches coming from the mountain of the Dacians, and of course are linked with the legendary Baba Yaga. Ancient keepers of spoiling, which is of course the Ordo Dracal ability of alchemy, a form of blood magic. We also then have the Ottites, who are another Mekhet bloodline. They are ancient keepers of the catacombs of Rome, necromancers, and apparently born of the monarchus himself. They disposed of the dead of the sanctified rituals, and so became familiar with ghosts. And within the Black Abbey, they seek to understand death, and so it would become no surprise that they would make their way to Constantinople, because, of course, there is a certain Avernian gate there. So it would be no surprise that this group of Mekhet would also make use of the bloodline power within the New Order Darkness Book of the Dead, which is a bloodline power that would allow vampires to interact with the dead and open up gateways to the dead. Then we have the al-Jabal, who are mortal hunters that survived into modern knights. They are the people of the mountain. This group is descended from the Hashin, the assassins. They are part holy order, part revolutionary group, part secret society. They operate out of Alamut and were part of the heresy of the Nazir Ismaili. They struck at officials of Islam and Christian kingdoms. The group suffered their own histories, The Sonian, the Syrian leader of the order, and Hassan II, the leader of the Alamut order, clashed over the ritual trappings of their order. But the reality was that the Sonian had learned that vampires had infiltrated their order. The Sonian and the Saladin, the Sultan, joined together to root out the monsters, creating a secret group for this task. The assassins survived the Mongols and continued their war against all manner of creatures, following the Nazir Ismaili doctrines. Their faith is removed from the ritual and trappings of religions, and is more focused on philosophy, mysticism, Gnosticism, astrology, etc. They are devoted to the killing of supernatural creatures who they see as the children of Satan. So, of course, this then is a group that fits in very well as a group born during the Dark Ages, and it can be used as a group for Hunter the Vigil. So there you go, a very quick overview of how you could use various different groups of vampires and mortal groups and religious creeds and covenants for within the New World of Darkness and Vampire the Requiem to tell stories within the Dark Ages. Mike.
What's up? Yeah, definitely. And I have a couple ideas that I jotted down just to kind of add to this. Obviously, this isn't research from Ancient Mysteries and all that. These are just kind of more original ideas they could go kind of take and run with. Looking at an area that you didn't mention with the Kaisernacht and the kind of Night Society that formed in Central Europe, looking at England, one mystery that's always been discussed by scholars is the Lost Roman Legion, for example. And one idea that you could take and use in a Dark Ages game, perhaps, is a Lost Roman Legion up in Scotland that might have gone native and joined the Picts. Now, of course, this would have happened in 300 CE, but now we're up in the 1200s. Of course, with vampires, it's quite possible that some of the traditions of the Legio Mortem would have kept going from the days of Rome and of the kindred Camarilla. So you can have perhaps this army forming up there, which wants to recreate Rome in its own image by vampires that definitely remember it, and use that as a impetus for conflict in England.
Cool.
Another idea might be to kind of look at what might be going on in Russia and the Kievan Rus states, because these states would have had zero contact with Rome itself, and really wouldn't have any of the Camarilla trappings that you might see in other regions of Europe. But they do have some relations with Constantinople and the Eastern Roman Empire. So it definitely, you could play around with some ideas. For example, some of the bloodlines you mentioned are experimenting a lot with blood magic up there, and what the Order Dracula are doing, or will eventually do. So that could be one defining element of their society. But you also have to remember that around this time they're in conflict with the Golden Horde and the Mongols. And you have Alexander Nevsky doing his battles up there. So you can have a big meshing of all these different cultures with very, very, say, primal covenants and the like coming from the Mongols and the Golden Horde, but then also having a little bit of the maybe perhaps the Priskai political structure, and as well as some of the more spiritual folklore aspects of the bloodlines, all kind of combined together into one mixing pot right there, which could provide a lot of really interesting gameplay features for both politics and occult mystery, and it'll be pretty unique compared to, say, what you find in Vampire the Dark Ages or in the Modern Knights of Vampire the Requiem.
Yeah, with respect to the Mongol thing, I'm just trying to think, because obviously that was a book that was released towards the end of Dark Ages line originally, so again, that puts that into good use. I'm also trying to think, off the top of my head, I can't really think of them, and maybe I didn't even go through that, but I'm sure in Dance Macabre there could be some inspiration of how other covenants which exist in the modern night may have their roots within the heresies and schisms of the Dark Ages. And I think that's the interesting, I think the most interesting thing about this is because, whereas in Vampire the Masquerade, you have the Dark Ages as a very tumultuous time, and there's quite a lot of different factions which have similarities, but they're different flavors of that, and eventually it all finally boils down to, Anarchs, Camarilla, and the Sabbat, really, and then you've got the small variations within there. Whereas you have with this, I feel you've got like such a variety which tries to form some sort of blocks, so the Lancashire Sanctum and the Night Empire, but then also you can see the germs of other covenants growing. So, obviously you can see in Lithuania you can have certain elders who may survive into modern knights who are seen as some of the most preeminent members of the Circle of the Crone for particular cults of the Crone. And the same with the Ordo Draco. You can see certain groups that would survive and eventually join the Ordo Draco because obviously they discard the mysticism of the Lancashire Sanctum. So it'd be interesting with the Mongol thing you were saying to think about. There's the potential there. You could introduce what vampire covenants would there be that came with the Golden Horde? I don't know whether Requiem's really touched on what covenants would have existed in that part of the world, but I'm sure you could go to something such as Kindred the East to at least again give you the sort of inspirational material you need to flesh out. Well, that's what that group of vampires would have been that came from the East, and they could be broken down into a number of bloodlines. Like they're the more mystical group that believes in the celestial hierarchy, and those are the more kind of the more military part, related to the more military part of the Mongol horde and so forth. And it just seems like you could just literally paint this period with such a plethora of different proto-covenants and bloodlines, which in the modern knights exist really as a version of, be it a version of the Lancashire Sanctum or a version of the Invictus or a version of the Circle of Crown or the version of something else of any of those covenants, which within a particular city still retains those elements from a historical period.
Indeed. I think we could brainstorm some covenants for the Golden Horde just right now. Here's what I'm thinking. I'm thinking three things. We've got just looking at their, because they were such a military-based culture at that time, or raiding and conflict culture. You have the horse, you have the bow, and then you have the open steppe. So you have a covenant which is very animal-based, actually, and dealing with that, whether it be animalism or ghouling animals isn't too big in Requiem, but that could be...
Oh, I wouldn't say that. I mean, that fits with the Ventry. They
indeed
ghoul animals.
For the bow, that might be the more bloodthirsty conflict-based. As I remember, I'm trying to think back to some episodes of Hardcore History, the podcast, because they just talked about this for like at least 4 hours or something. The Mongols and the Tatars and their related groups were pretty bloodthirsty. So you could have a very a covenant with a very strict code of battle, dealing with that, and that'll be the bow aspect. And the steppe aspect, that might be a more cultured kind of earthen covenant, dealing with, let's go with organizing the kind and keeping them maybe not sated, but in check, because that would be very important with such a nomadic culture and the number of slaves that they're taking, to have kindred focused on watching out for all that, especially when you have, for example, some of the Khanates were just killing people massively after some of these battles, which would severely reduce the amount of prey that the vampires have. So watching out for that would be pretty important. So I don't know. What do you guys think?
That sounds pretty good. I mean, you can also see some of these groups, like that last one, being populated possibly by vampires of the Bura Carmen, who are a Nosferatu bloodline that's in the original Vampire the Requiem core book, who are like the unclean vampires because they're from a caste-based system. So, I mean, the one thing that I can't think of from the top of my head to fit with the Mongol thing is, I can't remember in Requiem, in all the books, how many Eastern bloodlines there are. What's been merely mentioned and what has been detailed. There's the what the hell are they called? What's the Indian term for demons?
Rakshasa?
There we go. Yeah, that's a bloodline of vampires.
Oh, okay.
In Requiem, so you could use that. Yeah, and the one thing I liked also when reading through this is the fact that there's potential, for different, an entire covenant based on, Persian, classic Persian beliefs. So, this goes back to stuff like Zoroastrianism and so forth, which is in, Iraq at that time, rather than just pure Islam. So again, you can inject, and that also is really interesting because that then links into which covenant? It's the Mithricism, which turns up in the Vampire the Requiem book Mythologies, and which I gave a stab in Forgotten Lore 1 or 2. I rewrote their rules up using the newer blood magic rules. Yeah. So you could have the root of where that Mithraic, you could see where some of that Mithraic cult comes from, and or may still exist even during the Dark Ages. Because they're completely the opposite. They love tearing apart the Lancaster Sanctum. So they could have been in Constantinople fighting against the western part of the Lancaster Sanctum because they were a worse enemy than even the eastern part. I think, within the New World of Darkness, and like the whole thing right at the end with, there's a group of hunters and everything. There's so much here that you could do. Like that literally is already saying, play Hunter the Vigil in the Dark Ages.
Totally, man. Totally.
With a bit of Assassin's Creed thrown in. Yeah. I think there's a lot to do there, and I don't think you can just pass it off as, why don't you just play Vampire the Dark Ages? Because I think there's enough differences to make it a interesting enough setting, and possibly quite refreshing for people that have played Vampire the Dark Ages but want to play in that time period again, but where they have less inherent familiarity with the setting, and the mystery is re-injected into playing a vampire game during that time period.
Right. Well, I think the political structure that you mentioned is pretty interesting. And it's definitely different than both Vampire the Dark Ages and Vampire the Masquerade, in that in Vampire the Dark Ages you have these individual cities with a prince, and they're all pretty much isolated. And then in Vampire the Masquerade, you have these individual cities with a prince, and then there's also the upper Camarilla hierarchy, which you can't really affect and really typically will not interact with. But with these different envoys that you have going to the central government, I'll have to look up the term that you used. Not the princes, but the electors, correct?
Yeah.
Yes.
That's right.
With these different electors who may not even be the prince of the city, but then may be representing, you have an instant conflict between two high-ranking vampires in that city, and how they will interact with the greater government, and how the lesser vampires in the city will have to choose sides politically.
Oh, and then you have the guilds as well, because that works into all of that, and it just really messes up the entire political system.
One thing I'll say, and I think, Chigg, you may be able to confirm or deny or possibly agree with this, is that, Chris, you kind of mentioned that when you look at Vampire the Dark Ages, as it was originally released, it really just comes down to, you kind of have like a Camarilla, political structure with the prince, and then you have the more anarch type vampires, and then the more religious heretical vampires who could in some ways represent the Sabbat. And it's not too different than the modern version. And I think one of the unfortunate things with Vampire the Dark Ages, which may need to be fixed with the newer 20th anniversary that's coming out, is that they introduced these really cool little factions like the Prometheans. And the Order of Bitter Ashes and the Furies. But they're so small and minor. I mean, they write them up, but they hardly use them again in other source books. And I think that was a real loss for the setting overall.
Because those all turn up in, Ashen Cults and Cainite Heresy, don't they?
They're in the core book, and they are mentioned occasionally, but they're very minor factions. I think they should have been integrated a lot more, maybe even to the level of Covenants, Vampire the Requiem, to kind of enhance the political nature and the philosophical debates of vampires at that time.
Well, sure, but they have to write them off before the modern knights. They have to get rid of that before you get to the modern setting.
Well, you could have them destroyed in the Anarch Revolt in some ways, right?
Exactly, and you can see how, I mean, in the case of, I can't remember what's the exact belief structure of the Prometheans, or what's their exact, what's their whole shtick?
They were, a lot of them wanted to return to like the kind of Carthage ideal that they once had. They're kind of a reformist sect, I would say.
You see, it'd be really cool for like some of the elders of those to have somehow survived into modern knights within the Anarchs, to kind of have that ultra far, elders seeing really far, who are playing the really long game, who foresee a modern knight where they can have that, where humanity has modernized and evolved to the point that they can accept vampires. Kind of, it's almost like they're the guys that are expecting everything to go a bit True Blood.
Yeah, I can kind of see that.
That would be actually really interesting. They've been playing the long game. They're the ones that have who are maybe behind some of the weird scientific, who in modern knights, maybe they're behind some of the weird scientific research into synthetic blood. And have that very, or they're the ones that finally gave up on that idea and think, let's do the final solution and just keep humans as cattle and go for a kind of Daybreakers kind of scenario. But yeah, that's kind of different.
Indeed. But yeah, I like it. Good stuff. All right, I think that's it for the Dark Ages, isn't it?
Oh yeah.
All right, good. So, any closing remarks? Anything else we want to say about this episode, World of Darkness, other things?
I don't think so. Anything we've got planned for the next show? Any ideas? Or people should send us some ideas, of course.
We do have some ideas stored up, but I think what I really got to do is finally do that Promethean the Created rapid fire. I've been promising it for 2.5 years. Maybe I should finally get around to it.
And I need to read Guild Halls and finish reading Strix Chronicles. Yes. That's pretty cool.
Should be good. Yo, Chigg, what do you want to do next episode? What are you thinking?
Oh, I don't know. It's a month away. I don't even know what I'm going to do tomorrow.
I don't know. Maybe like 3 weeks away. All right, we'll think about it. Are we good with Changeling, or do you have more to talk about?
I can always talk more about Changeling.
All right, we'll see about that. It might be good to mix it up. Maybe we'll do that in a couple episodes.
Sure.
Cool. All right. I like how we just plan our next episode on the show now. It just makes things easier.
I'm sure someone might suggest something, or something will pop up that'll inspire something, or I actually get around to reading a particular book. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I think that's about it.
All right, good stuff. So, this has been Darker Days Radio. You can check us out at darker-days.org. That's our website. On Facebook, we're facebook.com/darkerdaysradio. On Google+, we are the Darker Days Radio community. Just give it a search and find it. On Google+, we, of course, have games going on. Aaron has his Wraith game coming up. I need to set up an event for the next Tremere Chronicles, which is actually going to happen.
Couple weeks away. Sweet. And I also have to make an actual play for that to get everyone up to speed so they actually remember what the heck happened like 3 months ago in this game. And additionally, we have our Twitter account, Darker Days Radio, and then we're on Tumblr.
Yeah, there's Tumblr's pretty good because obviously because of its nature of it. Recently, they've had a lot of the artwork by Samuel Aria, so for Guild Halls of the Deathless. So you can check out that stuff there. And you'll see a lot of my pictures of stuff I've painted recently. And of course, we're on YouTube, so every show is being dumped onto YouTube as well. So you can listen to us there if you prefer that. Um, and yeah, Forgotten Law 5 is in the works. It's just, editing takes some time, so it will get done. Don't worry, we have some stuff there. And Mike, you said you're writing something for it?
Yeah, I wrote like a page and a half. I need to get back to that.
So
It'll be in 5 or possibly 6.
Yeah, yeah. So I think that pretty much is it.
Yes, it is. This has been Dark Ages
Yeah.
Radio, and you should all have a good night.
See ya.
Chris?
Uh-oh.
Oh, shit.
We lost Chris.
No. Is it going to be one of those kinds of episodes?
His mic cut out. He's still on the call.
He's still
He's
typing.
typing something.
He can hear us.
Let's talk bad about him if he can hear us. I mean, come on.
Psh, yeah. Look at that guy. Being all British, drinking his
With his
tea.
face.
Yeah. Actually, I kind of like tea.
Gross.
Hello?